Welcome to my channel. This is a story of love, loss, and new beginnings. It was a chilly autumn evening when Sarah received the devastating news. Her husband John had been in a car accident and had passed away. Sarah sat in her living room, staring blankly ahead as the news sunk in. Her best friend, Emily, sat beside her, holding her hand. "I can't believe this is happening," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I know, Sarah. I'm so sorry," Emily said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I don't know how I'm going to go on without him," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You will, Sarah. You're stronger than you think," Emily said, trying to comfort her friend. Days passed, and Sarah was lost in a sea of grief. She couldn't bring herself to do anything except sit on the couch and cry. Emily came over every day, trying to get Sarah to eat or go for a walk, but Sarah just couldn't muster the energy. "I don't know how to live without him," Sarah said to Emily one day. "I know, Sarah, it's going to be hard, but you have to keep going," Emily said, trying to sound optimistic. "It's not fair. He was too young to die," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "I know, but sometimes life isn't fair," Emily said softly. Weeks turned into months, and Sarah started to slowly emerge from her grief. She went back to work, started exercising, and even began to socialize again. But the pain of John's loss was still there, just under the surface. One day, Sarah was walking in the park when she heard a familiar voice. "Sarah?" She turned around and saw John's best friend, David. "David, what are you doing here?" she asked, surprised to see him. "I heard what happened to John. I'm so sorry, Sarah," David said, his eyes filled with sadness. "Thank you," Sarah said, trying to hold back her tears. "I know this is hard for you, Sarah, but I want you to know that John loved you more than anything. He would want you to be happy," David said, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "I miss him so much," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "I know, but you have to keep going. You have a lot of people who love you and are here for you," David said, his voice gentle. Sarah took a deep breath and nodded. "Thank you, David. It means a lot." As David walked away, Sarah sat down on a bench and let herself cry. She knew that the pain of John's loss would never completely go away, but she also knew that she had to keep going for John's sake. And so she did. She lived her life, always remembering the love that she and John had shared, and knowing that he would always be with her in spirit. Months turned into years, and Sarah continued to live her life, building a new sense of normalcy without John. She made new friends, pursued new hobbies, and even started dating again. But no matter how much time passed, she still felt a twinge of sadness whenever she thought of John. One day, Sarah was cleaning out some old boxes in the attic when she came across a photo album. As she flipped through the pages, she saw countless pictures of her and John, smiling and laughing together. Tears streamed down her face as memories flooded back. "I miss you so much, John," she whispered to the photo. Suddenly, she heard a familiar voice behind her. "I miss you too, Sarah." Sarah turned around and gasped. There stood John, looking exactly as he had the day he died. "I can't believe it. Is it really you?" Sarah asked, her heart racing. "It's me, Sarah," John said, smiling at her. Sarah was overcome with emotion as she ran to embrace him, feeling his arms wrap around her in a warm embrace. "I thought I'd never see you again," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "I've been watching over you, Sarah. I'm so proud of everything you've accomplished," John said, his voice gentle. Sarah pulled back and looked up at him. "But how is this possible? How are you here?" John smiled at her. "I don't know, Sarah. Maybe it's just a dream. But even if it is, I want you to know that I'll always be with you. I'll never leave you." Sarah smiled through her tears. "I love you, John. I always will." "I love you too, Sarah," John said, leaning down to kiss her forehead. As Sarah closed her eyes and wrapped her arms around him, she knew that even if this was just a dream, she would always carry the love and memories of John in her heart. And for that, she was forever grateful. As Sarah held John in her arms, she felt a sudden jolt. When she opened her eyes, she found herself lying in her bed alone. Was it all just a dream? Sarah wondered, looking around her room, but it had felt so real, so vivid. As she sat up, she heard a knock on her door. It was Emily, looking worried. "Sarah, are you okay?" "I heard you crying," Emily said, coming into the room. Sarah looked up at her, still feeling a bit disoriented. I don't know. I had this strange dream." Emily sat down beside her. What happened? Sarah told her about seeing John, about the way he had looked at her with love and tenderness. "I know it sounds crazy, but it felt so real," Sarah said, her voice shaking. Emily looked at her with concern. "Maybe you should talk to someone about it, a therapist or a grief counselor." Sarah nodded, feeling suddenly overwhelmed. "Maybe you're right." In the days that followed, Sarah tried to put the strange dream behind her. She went to work, spent time with friends, and even went on a few dates. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. One night, as she was getting ready for bed, she heard a noise outside. She went to the window and looked out, but saw nothing. Suddenly, she heard a voice behind her. "Hello, Sarah." She spun around, heart pounding. There stood John, looking just as he had in her dream. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "John, is it really you?" John smiled at her. "It's me, Sarah. I've come back to be with you." Sarah couldn't believe it. She ran to him and threw her arms around him, feeling his warmth and solidity. "But how is this possible?" she asked, pulling back to look at him. John shrugged. "I don't know, Sarah. It's like I've been given a second chance. A chance to be with you again." Sarah felt a mix of emotions: joy, disbelief, fear. What if this was all just a hallucination, a delusion? But at the same time, she couldn't deny the way her heart leaped at the sight of John. As the days turned into weeks, Sarah and John settled into a new routine. They went for walks, cooked dinner together, and talked late into the night. It was like they had never been apart. But as much as Sarah wanted to believe that John's return was real, she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in the back of her mind. What if this was all just a trick, or worse, a trap? One night, as they were lying in bed, Sarah turned to John. "I have to ask you something, John. Something important." John looked at her, concern etched on his face. "What is it, Sarah?" Sarah took a deep breath. "How did you die, John? I need to know." John's face fell. "I was in a car accident. I didn't make it." Sarah felt her heart clench. That was the truth, the same story she had heard from the police and the coroner. But then she remembered something else. "John, what was the date of the accident?" John hesitated. It was October 17th. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "That's impossible. That's the day we buried you." John looked at her, confusion in his eyes. "What do you mean?" Sarah sat up, her heart racing. "John, I don't know how you're here, or what's." John's face went pale as he tried to process what Sarah was saying. "That can't be right. I remember the accident. I remember dying." Sarah shook her head. "But if you died on October 17th, how could you be here with me now? It doesn't make any sense." John looked at her, fear creeping into his eyes. "I don't know, Sarah. I don't know what's happening to me." Sarah felt a pang of sadness and sympathy for John. She had always believed in the supernatural and the afterlife, but this was beyond anything she had ever experienced or even heard of. As they talked into the night, Sarah realized that John was just as confused and scared as she was. He didn't know how or why he was back, and he didn't know how long he would be able to stay. In the weeks that followed, Sarah and John tried to make the most of their time together, cherishing every moment as if it might be their last. But the sense of uncertainty and unease never left them. One day, as they were walking in the park, John suddenly stopped and grabbed Sarah's hand. "Sarah, I have to go. I don't know how much longer I can stay." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. "No, John, don't go. Please don't leave me again." John looked at her with a mix of love and sadness. I have to, Sarah. I don't belong here, and I don't know what will happen if I stay. Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. I understand. Just promise me that you'll always remember me. Promise me that you'll always love me. John pulled her close and kissed her forehead. I promise, Sarah. I'll never forget you, and I'll always love you. And with that, he was gone. Sarah stood there for a moment, feeling the emptiness and despair wash over her. But then she remembered something, a sense of peace and comfort, as if John's presence had left a small imprint on her heart. In the weeks and months that followed, Sarah tried to make sense of what had happened. She went to therapy, talked to friends and family, and even consulted with paranormal experts. But no one had any answers for her. And yet, despite the confusion and uncertainty, Sarah felt a sense of gratitude and hope. John's return had given her a chance to say goodbye, to find closure and healing. And even if she never understood the how or why, she knew that his love for her had been real and true, and that was enough. As Sarah continued to process her experience of John's sudden return and departure, she found herself struggling with the daily challenges of life. She lost her job, her relationship with her family became strained, and she felt increasingly isolated. One day, as she was walking through a local park, she noticed a man sitting on a bench, looking dejected and alone. Something about him caught her attention, and she found herself drawn to him. "Excuse me," she said tentatively. "Are you okay?" The man looked up at her, surprise evident on his face. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just thinking." Sarah nodded. "I know the feeling. Mind if I join you?" The man shrugged. "Sure, why not?" As they talked, Sarah learned that the man's name was Mark, and that he had recently gone through a difficult breakup. He was struggling to come to terms with his feelings of hurt and betrayal, and was feeling lost and alone. Sarah listened to Mark with empathy and understanding, drawing on her own experiences of loss and heartbreak. They talked for hours, until the sun began to set and the park started to empty out. "Thanks for talking with me," Mark said, as they stood up to leave. "It's been a long time since I've had a real conversation with anyone." Sarah smiled. "Anytime. You know, I'm actually looking for work right now. If you hear of anything, let me know." Mark nodded. "Actually, I might have something for you. Let me get your number, and I'll give you a call." Sarah felt a spark of hope and excitement as she gave Mark her number. As they said goodbye, she felt a sense of gratitude for the unexpected connection she had made. Over the next few weeks, Sarah and Mark continued to talk and text, building a friendship that felt easy and natural. Mark introduced her to some of his friends, and Sarah started to feel like she had a place in the world again. And then one day, as she was walking home from a job interview, she got a call from Mark. "Hey Sarah, I have some news. I just got a job offer in another city. It's a great opportunity, but it means I'll have to move away." Sarah felt a sense of disappointment and sadness wash over her. "That's too bad, Mark. I was hoping we could continue to hang out." Mark hesitated for a moment. "Actually, Sarah, there's something else. I know this might sound crazy, but I have feelings for you. I know we've only known each other for a short time, but I feel like we have a connection that's worth exploring." Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. She had been so focused on her own struggles and doubts that she had never considered the possibility of a romantic connection with Mark. But as she listened to him speak, she realized that he was right. There was something between them, something that felt real and meaningful. And so, against all odds, Sarah took a chance on love. She moved to the new city with Mark, and they started a new life together, filled with hope and possibility. And as they looked back on the twists and turns that had brought them together, they realized that sometimes the most unexpected paths can lead to the most beautiful destinations. As Sarah packed her belongings and prepared to move to the new city with Mark, she felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. The prospect of starting a new life with someone she cared about was thrilling, but the thought of leaving everything she knew behind was also daunting. As she hugged her family goodbye and said farewell to the only home she had ever known, Tears streamed down her face. She was leaving behind a piece of herself, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for what lay ahead. But as she settled into her new life with Mark, she found that her fears were unfounded. Their relationship blossomed and grew, filling her with a sense of joy and contentment that she had never known before. Mark was her anchor in a world that felt uncertain and unpredictable. He supported her through her job search, celebrating every small victory and encouraging her to keep going when things felt tough. He made her laugh and helped her see the beauty in the world, even on the darkest days. As they explored their new city together, hand in hand, Sarah felt a sense of wonder and amazement at the new experiences that lay before her. She tried new foods, visited new places, and made new friends, all with Mark by her side. And as they lay in bed at night, wrapped in each other's arms, Sarah felt a sense of peace and belonging that she had never known before. She had taken a chance on love, and it had paid off in ways she could never have imagined. Looking back on the journey that had brought her to this moment, Sarah realized that sometimes the most unexpected twists and turns can lead to the most beautiful destinations. And she was grateful for every step of the way, even the ones that had felt painful or difficult. For it was those moments that had led her to where she was now, in the arms of the man she loved, in a new city filled with possibility and wonder. And as she closed her eyes and drifted off to sleep, she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with courage and grace, knowing that she was not alone.